If I say 5, you gotta be 5, regardless of whoever. But I understand that it's a Friday and people are working and everything else. Well, this is a very important afternoon because we have in our midst a young lady who has been talking and writing and very active in the oil and gas debate in Guyana. I've read some of her work, and this is what attracted me to her work. I read some of her work and saw her for the first time on YouTube when you spoke about the oil and gas and what it means for a country like Guyana. And one of the things that really struck me in her presentation online is the word verification. That's a very important word, verification. Now, what is verification? It means several things in diplomacy, in the language of diplomacy, other things. But in her case, in the case in which it was mentioned, the big oil companies that go and extract the oil, since you don't have a local presence into what they're doing, whatever they tell you, you're forced to believe it. So if they say that this month we extracted 200 barrels of oil, who's to know? You're not there. There's no presence there. So it's important that we, in this whole debate and what is going to likely happen in 2020, that we have some measure of verification, transparency, all these words come into play, and that we know exactly what is going on and that we know how Guyana can benefit from this. Because from my readings, there's so many experts that have come up since Guyana has discovered oil and gas, that these are overnight experts. And we don't know where it will come from or who they stand for or what they stand for. Now, Melinda has written, as I said, and spoken, and in my opinion, one of the credible voices in this debate. And so it's my privilege and my pleasure, our pleasure on behalf of OGGN, Oil and Gas Network, to invite her here. This is part of a series of debates we're going to have and presentations. We had one here before with 3 other persons, and those were credible, very credible people as well. And Melinda walks in that path, this path of credibility. And she has a very powerful voice because, and I don't only mean when she speaks, she writes, she speaks, and she's respected in the field. Melinda, it's a pleasure to have you here this afternoon.
Thank you.
And to welcome you to this debate and to ask you to make your presentation.
Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thanks very much for coming out, and thank you to the OGGN network for inviting me to come here and to discuss whether Guyana is getting a fair deal for its oil and gas. I'm going to start by making it absolutely clear that I have no political affiliation whatsoever. I'm not connected to any political party in Guyana. Tonight's question is Guyana getting a fair deal for its oil and gas? The short answer is no. Guyana is not getting a fair deal for its oil and gas. The deal is grossly unfair to Guyana as a sovereign state, and it's grossly unfair to the Guyanese people. It's basically a deal of free oil and free gas for the oil companies. Now, the money side is bad enough, but if you look at this deal from the perspective of the global economy, or the environment, or the law, you get the same answer. This is a bad deal for Guyana, and if it's a bad deal, then it can't be a fair deal. We have a limited amount of time because my flight is an hour earlier than I realized. So what I will do is look at some of the key provisions of the petroleum agreement. I'll tell you what the global financial experts are saying about the global economy, and I'll tell you what the scientists are saying about the global environment. And I'll show you some of the illegalities of the deal. And then, of course, it's up to you whether you agree or disagree with the view that this deal is not fair to Guyana, and this deal is not fair to the Guyanese people. And then at the end of the presentation, I'm going to suggest a way forward for Guyana. I'm going to suggest some things that you can do as a diaspora to protect Guyana from this grossly unfair giveaway of Guyana's wealth. You don't live in Guyana, but I know you still care about your homeland. If you're brave enough to let go of the oil dream, which is really a nightmare, then I'm going to invite you to dream of a new future for Guyana. A future in which Guyana increases its wealth rather than squandering it as the politicians have done for 53 years. And I'll suggest some things that you can do to make that dream happen. The great German poet Goethe said, "Whatever you dream you can do, begin it." Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. So we can try to end the evening with a little of that magic. But first, we have to get past the ugly truth of Guyana's oil deal. I'm going to keep talking mostly about oil, but the same points really apply to gas. Now, Guyana owns 100% of this petroleum resource. It's ours. It belongs to the people of Guyana. It doesn't belong to the government. We don't have to share this oil with anybody. We don't have to allow anybody to take the oil out of the ground. And we could actually look for ways to get money to leave the oil in the ground. We can look for money to protect our fisheries and our marine biodiversity, and I'll come back to that. Let's start by looking at the oil money, because that's what interests people the most. How much money will Guyana get for this oil? Now, the economists and the financial experts are telling everybody Guyana's going to get 12.5% of Guyana's oil. In other words, the government is giving the oil companies 87.5% of the oil that Guyana owns. The oil companies don't pay for this oil. So basically, they're getting nearly 90% of Guyana's oil for free. Just let me pause there and ask you, do you think that's fair to the people of Guyana? No, of course not. Actually, it's worse. The economists and financial experts don't mention Article 11.9 of the Petroleum Agreement. Tucked away in this little subclause, it says that the contractor shall have the right to use in any petroleum operations as much of the production as may reasonably be required by it, therefore, and the quantities so used or lost shall be excluded from any calculations of cost oil and or cost gas and or profit oil and or profit gas entitlement. This is a willfully obscure sentence. Let's see if we can extract some meaning and put it into recognizable English. First of all, the contractor is not one company, it's three. Esso Exploration and Production Guyana Limited, Hess Guyana Exploration Limited, and CNOOC Nexen Petroleum Guyana Limited. The agreement is saying each one of these companies gets to take as much oil and gas as it requires for its petroleum operations. So what are these petroleum operations? The petroleum agreement says it's all the prospecting operations and all the production operations that these three companies carry out. So it means all the petroleum operations under the 2016 Petroleum Agreement and all the petroleum operations under the 1999 Agreement. In other words, the government agreed that Esso could go back and recover its costs from 20 years ago. Let's do the calculation based on 100 barrels of oil. From this 100 barrels of oil, Esso, Hess and Nexen can take as much oil as they reasonably require for their petroleum operations. Don't ask me what these oil companies reasonably require. I don't know. The government doesn't know either. It could be anything. It could be 1 barrel, it could be 99 barrels. The petroleum agreement doesn't have a limit. Don't ask me what petroleum operations Esso, Hess and Nexen are carrying out. I don't know. The operations are 120 miles offshore. The government isn't there, so they don't know either. They just rely on what the oil companies tell them. So you have 100 barrels of oil minus the unknown amount of oil that Esso, Hess and Nexen are entitled to take. So we have some oil left, but it doesn't go to Guyana. 3/4 of what is left goes to Esso, Hess and Nexen, and that's for their recoverable contract costs. What are these recoverable contract costs? Well, under this contract, just about everything is a recoverable cost. There isn't enough time for me to read out the list of recoverable contract costs. If you want to know more, please look at Annex C, but just let me give you a few examples. It includes all exploration costs, all production costs. There's no ring fencing, so if a well is dry, Esso, Hess and Nexen get their costs back from the well that has oil. Even the IMF has criticised this. As you know, oil wells can cost billions of dollars. The oil companies also get back all their labour costs. They can pay their workers whatever they like and they get that back. Every piece of equipment is a recoverable cost. They don't even have to pay for their laptops. They get back everything. They get back the costs for every house and office that they rent for their staff and every piece of furniture they want. They get back what they spend on recreational facilities. I don't know how the government interprets this. I mean, does it cover every scotch and soda? ExxonMobil gave Conservation International in Guyana $10 million US. That's another expense. Their entire program to get support in Guyana, it's not generosity or being nice, it's a business cost. So they take their costs out of Guyana's oil every month. If the costs are more than 3/4 of the production in that month, the oil companies can carry the costs to the next month, and the next month, and the next month. Obviously, as long as the oil companies are taking out oil, they have expenses. And when the well is no longer viable, they have to shut it down. These abandonment costs can run to billions. So they will get their expenses right up to the end, and Guyana's share will never go up. Okay, I said they take 75% of what's left, and that leaves 25%. That doesn't go to Guyana. The oil companies then take half of that. So what's left? 12.5%. But 12.5% of what? You don't know. Why? Because we don't know how much oil Esso, Hess and Nexen will take off at the beginning. Maybe they take 50 barrels. In that case, Guyana gets 6.25 barrels out of every 100 barrels. Maybe they take 60 barrels. You see the problem? All these people telling you Guyana gets 12.5%. They're not telling you 12.5% of what? Suppose it's nothing. 12.5% of nothing is nothing. And there is another problem. As I mentioned, the oil production is 120 miles offshore. The Guyana government does not have any competent and independent body out there checking what is going on. The minister has to give 7 days notice in order to go and observe the petroleum operations. And you may be asking, well, why do they need 7 days notice? And in any case, the minister and GGMC, the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, clearly know nothing about oil and oil production, so there's probably not much point in them going to observe the petroleum operations. So Guyana will never know for sure how much oil is produced. All Guyana can do is trust that these 3 oil companies are telling Guyana the truth, and that if they say they produced 100 barrels of oil, it's 100 barrels of oil, not 120 or 150 or 1,000. Now I know what you're thinking. Some of you will be saying, but we will get 2% royalty on all the oil that is produced. No. Remember, Guyana doesn't know how much oil is actually produced. Guyana only knows what the oil companies say is produced. Secondly, the royalty is not paid on the oil produced. It's only paid on oil produced and sold. It's not payable on the oil that they take for their petroleum operations. So if they produced 100 barrels of oil, they take what they require for fuel and transportation, the 50 or 60 barrels or however much, there's no limit. They sell the rest. Well, it's that little bit that they sell that they pay the royalty on. But they might not be able to sell that oil for very much longer, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes. And when they can't sell the oil, there is no royalty. Let's just close off the finances by looking at the tax arrangements. The Guyanese people are not rich. GDP per capita is about 4,000 US dollars, roughly 810,000 Guyana dollars a year. That's not enough to pay rent, buy food, pay the light bill, take care of the children, and so on. Nevertheless, the government already takes about $170,000 in taxes. In fact, as soon as you earn more than 100 US dollars a month, the government is taking money from the people to pay fat salaries and perks to ministers and pensions to former MPs and grandiose schemes like the hideous Marriott Hotel and the expansion of the airport and so on. At the other end of the scale is ExxonMobil. Earlier this year, they paid $3.5 billion in dividends to their shareholders, and that's a lot of money. But Exxon's subsidiary, Esso, pays no tax to Guyana and will pay no tax to Guyana no matter how much money Esso makes by getting free oil from Guyana. And the same is true of Hess and Exxon. So if you're a foreign oil company, you get free oil and you pay nothing to Guyana. But if you're a Guyanese citizen trying to survive on a pittance, you have to pay tax. Let me ask you again, is that a fair deal for the Guyanese people? If you go to Guyana, you will hear a lot of talk about Guyana following the Norway model. That is, of course, utter rubbish. Norway makes oil companies pay a tax of 78%. That's why Norway is rich. Guyana is giving away its oil. So how is Guyana going to get rich by giving away its oil? The deal is nothing more than a financially disastrous oil-for-free deal. Is that fair to Guyana? We've been assuming that, bad as the deal is, Guyana will still get a few barrels of oil out of every 100. Now, to get money, Guyana has to sell this oil. Guyana doesn't know how to do that, so it will have to pay Esso or Hess or Exxon or all three of them to sell the oil on the global market. I'm going to turn now to the global economy in which Guyana will be selling this oil. This is the worst possible timing for Guyana. Why? Because of global warming. Petroleum emits greenhouse gases, which cause global warming, which causes extreme temperatures, extreme weather, ocean acidification, and rising sea levels. Global warming will destroy life on the planet. The safe limit for greenhouse gases is 350 parts per million. We're already at 415, and countries have agreed to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Oil companies now already have vast reserves of oil that they cannot burn. Oil reserves that cannot be burned are worthless. They constitute a carbon bubble in the global economy, which is estimated to be between 1 and 4 trillion US dollars. And the Government of the Bank of England has told oil companies to write down these stranded fossil fuel assets. Oil has no future. Don't underestimate the speed at which change is taking place. Saudi Arabia is investing in renewable energy. The two biggest countries, India and China, are rolling out massive renewable energy programs. Shell, is already supplying 700,000 households in the UK with 100% renewable energy. 700,000 households is more than the whole of Guyana. The cost of oil is also going to go up as a result of carbon pricing. Now, we're here in New York. The New York Attorney General has sued ExxonMobil for lying to investors about the true cost of its oil production. That's what the actual summons says. Guess what? Guyana is one of the countries that the summons covers as a place where ExxonMobil is alleged to have lied. Don't underestimate the risk of the sudden collapse of the oil sector. The oil sector is already the worst performing business sector. Investors are pulling out. The Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund has over $1 trillion in it. Norway made its money from oil. Norway is pulling out of fossil fuel investments. Guyana's oil reserves are very quickly going to become a stranded fossil fuel asset. This is not just unburnable carbon, this is unextractable carbon. It is just too late for Guyana to enter the oil market. What will happen when the oil sector collapses? Well, probably Guyana will be left with the bill. Who will end up having to cap the oil wells so they don't leak and kill marine life? Probably Guyana. Guyana will end up with a burden for wells that should never have been drilled in the first place. And it's probably a good time now to look at the environment. The world faces two catastrophes: climate change and biodiversity collapse. This proposed oil venture will contribute to climate change and will destroy biodiversity. In other words, Guyana is going to do the two things that destroy the very life systems of the planet. Liza Phase 1 is going to emit over 21 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and this is just from the project. This is not from actually burning the petroleum when it comes out. What does the EIA say? It says that the potential influence of greenhouse gas emissions on the global climate change is not measurable with an acceptable level of confidence, and therefore is not addressed in this EIA. In other words, they didn't bother to say what impact the greenhouse gas emissions would have on global warming. Global warming causes sea levels to rise. Where is Georgetown? It's below sea level. Where is the agriculture? It's below sea level. Where is Guyana's wealth? It's on the coast, where it will disappear as a result of rising sea levels. This oil deal will contribute to global warming, which will destroy the capital city and the nation's agriculture. What's going to happen to the Guyanese people who live on the coast? Who's going to pay for them to move? Is that a fair deal for giving away Guyana's oil and gas? Guyana is rich in biodiversity, marine and terrestrial. That biodiversity is natural capital. But oil production is already destroying that biodiversity, and nobody has put a value on that to take it out of the cost of the deal. Liza Phase 1's project area is 50 square kilometres. More than 19 square miles will be damaged. According to ESSO's environmental impact assessment, Liza Phase 1 alone is dumping 4,000 barrels of sewage in the ocean every day. At the end of this proposed 20 years of this project, that would be 1.2 billion gallons of sewage. On that basis, Guyana is roughly going to get a gallon of sewage for every barrel of oil in the reserve. I think that sums up this deal better than anything else. It's a deal fit for the sewer. Guyana gives away its oil and it gets sewage in return. Now, when you have oil, you have the risk of an oil spill. In 1989, Exxon Valdez tanker, the Oxon tanker, ran aground and released about 26,000 barrels of oil into the Prince William Sound in Alaska. It covered 11,000 square miles of ocean surface. In the days immediately after the spill, about 2,000 sea otters, 300 harbour seals, 22 orcas, 250 bald eagles, and about 250,000 of seabirds died, and they continue to die. That was 30 years ago. Prince William Sound has not recovered. ESSO's EIA has a spill scenario of 20,000 barrels of oil for 30 days. That's 600,000 barrels, which is more than double Exxon Valdez. And what do they say? The EIA says, although the probability of an oil spill reaching the Guyana coast is very small, a spill at a Liza well would likely impact marine resources found near the well, such as sea turtles and marine mammals that may transmit or inhabit the area impacted by a spill. Air quality, water quality, seabirds and marine fish could also be impacted, although likely to a lesser extent, because the duration of acute impacts would not be long, and the impacts are reversible. A spill could potentially impact Guyanese fishermen if commercial fish and shrimp were impacted. So basically what they're saying in plain English is, in an oil spill scenario that's more than double the size of the Exxon Valdez spill, there won't be long-term acute impacts, and these impacts are reversible. It's unclear to me how the death of any plant or animal can be described as reversible. I mean, that is nonsense, isn't it? Another major threat is that of a well blowout. Now, the ocean is about a mile deep, and the oil is about 2.2 miles below the seabed, so the drilling is taking place more than 3 miles down. You may remember the BP Macondo well, which blew out, and it took BP 87 days to cap. In that space of time, the well deposited 4.9 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico and covered 68,000 square miles. The Audubon Society estimated that over 1 million birds were killed. The BBC says more than 5,000 whales, dolphins and porpoises were killed. Unknown quantities of fish were killed, and fish populations have not recovered. Oyster populations have not recovered, and thousands of endangered marine turtles are estimated to have been killed. This was serious long-term harm, and it was irreversible harm to ecosystems. Now, could a well blowout happen in Liza Phase 1? Of course. The environmental permit issued to ESSO for Liza 1 doesn't even require ESSO to use a blowout preventer. It merely says that ESSO should. And the permit for Liza 2 doesn't contain specifications for the blowout preventer. Furthermore, Even the best technology does not guarantee that a well will never blow out. There's no convincing evidence that the daily amount would only be 20,000 barrels, or that the spill would only last for 30 days. Remember, it took BP 87 days to cap their well. There's no evidence that Esso would be any faster. Suppose it took them 87 days. At 20,000 barrels of oil a day, the spill would be over 1.7 million barrels of oil. Where's that going to end up? Well, the oil spill response plan shows a spill of 600,000 barrels could reach the Caribbean islands. Now, the Caribbean tourism industry is worth about $6 billion, but only if it's got clean beaches. Esso, Hess and Nexen have little or no assets, and they're all registered offshore. They don't even have insurance for Liza 1. Who's going to get the bill for damage? Probably Guyana. The government says the Civil Defence Commission will handle oil spill response, and you can see the staff in their Wellington boots at the side of the rivers practicing, and they will do their best. These are dedicated men and women. But after decades of political mismanagement, Guyana simply does not have the resources to begin to cope with a spill. Actually, nobody does. Even the mighty United States of America could not stop the damage from the Macondo well blowout. After the BP Deepwater disaster, which was the Macondo well blowout, Rex Tillerson, the former president of Exxon Mobil, testified before the American House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee. And here's what he said. He said, "When these things happen, we are not well equipped to deal with them." I will repeat that. Oil companies are not well equipped to deal with a deep water well blowout. So why is Guyana allowing Esso, Hess and Nexen to do something as dangerous as deep water drilling? The Macondo blowout is said to have caused $17.2 billion worth of damage. Imagine the impact on Guyana of a blowout. This is also a strange concept. Money is no substitute for biodiversity. You can't buy a replacement leatherback turtle or sperm whale. Once it's dead, it's gone. No amount of money is going to bring it back. And borrowing from the sentiments attributed to Chief Seattle, is it only when the last whale has been killed and the last fish has been poisoned will we realize that we cannot eat money? So you may be asking at this point, why is this legal? Well, it might not be. The oil deal appears to be riddled with illegalities. You probably know there's a case in court already. The Environmental Protection Agency granted an environmental permit to Esso. The minister has granted a petroleum production license to Esso, plus Hess and Nexen, even though Hess and Nexen don't have an environmental permit. In February 2018, Raymond Gaskin brought an action for judicial review to quash the grant of the petroleum production license. The grounds, as set out in the publicly available court documents, are that the minister's decision is so flawed in law as to amount to a nullity, is void and of no legal effect, was made without or in excess of jurisdiction, is ultra vires, unreasonable, irrational, arbitrary, capricious, erroneous in law, and contrary to the provisions of the Environmental Protection Act, Cap 2005. I am one of the lawyers acting for Mr. Gaskin, and the matter is in court. We expect a decision soon, and I cannot discuss this case. But if you would like to know more, you can search on the internet for a fair deal for Guyana, a fair deal for the planet, where you will find publicly available information on the case. There are lots of other grounds to challenge this proposed oil project. The award of 600 blocks is illegal. You know about the secret $18 million bonus that has still not been put into the consolidated fund. The environmental permits do not appear to meet the requirements of national law. The entire project is probably contrary to constitutional rights to a healthy environment and to rights of intergenerational equity. Esso, Hess and Nexen are filing branch accounts rather than full accounts. I cannot find any law that entitled Raffle Tropman to sign the petroleum agreement of 2016
with the terms that it contains and give away Guyana's oil. Oil production now is contrary to the Paris Agreement and Guyana's international obligations to cut emissions because of climate change. The deal is probably contrary to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and so on. Obviously, if a deal has illegal elements in it, it cannot be fair to Guyana. The government of Guyana and the oil companies must obey the law and must be seen to obey the law. Otherwise, they are undermining the rule of law and democracy, and that is a very bad thing to do. And if it is a bad thing to do, how can it be a fair deal for Guyana? If you care about Guyana, there is much you can do. You, the diaspora, have influence. I'm going to close now with some suggestions. First of all, if you believe in the rule of law and democracy, you could insist that all oil activity stops now until all of the illegalities in this emerging petroleum sector can be identified and eliminated. You can put pressure on the politicians to put loyalty to Guyana above personal greed and loyalty to their various political parties. Second, you can think about the alternatives. It makes no sense to take the oil out of the seabed. But it does make sense for Guyana to create a marine protected area and, for example, earn money from its fisheries or from scientific and pharmaceutical research. It does make sense for Guyana to abandon oil, this proposed oil production, go to 100% renewable energy, and start taking carbon out of the atmosphere, again in return for payment. It does make sense for Guyana to be paid to reforest areas that are being destroyed by mining and by indiscriminate and irresponsible burning, for example, burning of savannas and bush islands. You can join the conversation to protect Guyana from the economic, financial, and social disaster of oil and put Guyana on the road to genuine wealth and prosperity for all. Thank you.